you guys. I am really batting 1,000 here with these pop-up lives. But I wanted to do this live today. We wanted to do it today, actually. Me personally, my reason was because it's Father's Day and I have really strong feelings about mothers. Like, I think mothers are extremely important to children, but believe it or not, despite the fact that I'm a mother, I think that fathers are essential to have both in the home and as part of the child's life. I think it benefits the mother and I think it benefits the children in ways that are often ignored. So I wanted to just, bring my man on here, just discuss the benefits of fathers, some issues surrounding parenting, and just kind of give some encouragement to people who are in fractured homes or who have, intact homes about why it is so important that we have healthy dynamics where the father is playing an active role both in parenting and leadership of the child and the other parent. That's my personal stance, but baby, your stance might differ. So do you want to start us off with what you view as the importance of fathers in the home or in a child's life actively, or wherever you want to start?
Yeah, so first and foremost, happy Father's Day to all the fathers, the brothers who may be listening. Um, and I don't just say it on this day, I say it every day, all day, because we don't stop being fathers just on Father's Day. But we do get some brief acknowledgement on this day. Um, however, with that being said, it's true. However, with that being said, um, I don't think I can convey or underscore the importance of fathers, and particularly Black fathers, because I say that because Black fathers get a lot of flack. There's a lot of tropes and axioms out about Black males, and there's some Black males, fathers that need to be accountable as well. So I don't want to paint this with a broad brush. But I do think there's a pervasive narrative that tends to be pathological when we're talking about Black male fathers. And, as Irene alluded to, what are my thoughts on the importance of it? Again, it just can't be underscored. Black fathers, I think Black fathers, and maybe you would consider other minoritized fathers, um, do double duty. Here's what I mean by that, because they're fighting the trope. They're going against a narrative that basically says that they aren't shit, that they're sperm donors, that they're hypersexualized, that they're all these negative pathological things, and that they're not in their children's life. And again, like I said earlier, unfortunately, some fathers or some males that definitely fits, what they are or not doing. But again, I know so many fathers that are extraordinary fathers, whether they're in the household or not, they're still playing a role, a very participatory role within the lives of their children. So, again, I just think that's underscored. Um, but I also want to extend it to fathers that may not be, you know, biological fathers, right? And I don't use the term step. That's what you step on. That's a noun. This is a, it's a, it's a all right. It's, fathers are more of a verb. Um,
True.
so, and with that being said, you know, and I just don't mean fathers of children that they're not theirs biologically. I mean kind of like the surrogate fathers. I mean the mentors that are part of the village. I mean the teachers. I mean the uncles. I mean the coaches. These individuals are often left outside of this conversation, and oftentimes they're really vital to our babies. And so, I've gotten a lot of texts and emails and Facebook posts from, um, my mentees' parents and, just a slew of people, mentees, um, students that I work with currently, you know, young brothers that I work with currently that are fathers, um, wishing me a happy Father's Day. And of course, I extended one back to them. So, we often say this is the best hood to rep, fatherhood. Um, and
I've never heard that. That's so cute.
and most black men, again, tend to take that very seriously. And I think we needed to do a better job of, changing that narrative. And so again, I want to be clear in what I'm saying about, the surrogate fathers, again, the ones that are not biological fathers, the ones that are in the community, whether it's the pastors, whether it's the coaches, whether it's the counselors, principals, educators, you know, those individuals, those black men play a huge role in the village, of making sure our babies are on the right track. And again, I just go on and on, but again, I want to kind of leave it at that. Fathers are essential. I mean, my father, he and I are still very close. My son, I spoke with him a few times today, and like I said, my mentees and the students and everything. My nephew, he's a father. Um, I wanted to call my brother from another mother, literally. And then he's a father as well. I mean, so for me, the men that I associate like in my circle that are fathers, they're actually good fathers. You know what I mean? They're really in their children's life. And again, that regardless if they're still with the mother or their partners or whatever the circumstances may be, they are still good fathers to their children. And kind of like to me, that's a prerequisite. You know what I mean? If you're not a good father, I can't really hang around with you. You change the people around you or you change the people around you. And so, again, when I hear these conversations about, deadbeat fathers and sperm donors and everything, I mean, I know that exists, so I'm not, I'm not saying that doesn't, but in my immediate circle, that's not the reality. And I know there's probably more often than not, but again, these skewed statistics are even, this narrative that's painted on black fathers in particular, again, is way too pathological.
Well, I definitely feel that in the Black community, so in my family in particular, fathers are very present, right? I have family that range from upper middle class. I really don't have any family members that are just overtly wealthy, but like upper middle class to at the poverty line. So I have a big family, and so there's like a range there. And regardless of class, in my family, fathers are very present. Um, so that was my experience growing up. What I do notice is that I recognize my experience in my family is not the experience of many of our people. And I feel like this could be for various reasons. And so I want to talk about the deadbeat father, because actually I think that we sort of need to talk about this, especially on Father's Day. The deadbeat father, I think, is the father that is often refused by women to have a relationship with their child because they're deadbeat, right? Because they're not providing financial support. They're not maybe visiting or engaging the child with regularity. So then the mother or whoever the custodial parent is, which is often in our community a woman, takes it upon theirself when that man does come around to deny him access or heavily control his access to his child. And so I personally want to start with the deadbeat dad. And I just want to start with saying this. Whether a man is providing money or not, that can be a frustration as, let's say, if you're a single mother. It is important. The child doesn't care. right? So I'm going to use myself for an example. So I obviously grew up with the dad. My parents separated and married other people. And so every summer and winter, I would go visit my father and his family. I'd fly unaccompanied minor out there. I'd go visit my father and his family. And that time was amazing for me. You know, I'm my mother's only child. My father went on to have 3 other kids. It was a chance for me to be with my brothers and sisters. It was a chance for me to deal with my family that has like a lot more kids. So when I would go out there, there were lots of cousins and things. Um, and that played a huge part in developing me as a person and my personality to this day because I had such a beautiful family up there. But when I would return back to California, my mother was really annoyed that I would really gloat over my father because I just basically worshiped my father when I was a child. I just thought he was so amazing. And it was my dad this and my dad that and my dad, my dad, my dad. And it was actually really irritating to my mother. Now, she never restricted me from seeing him, but I recall that being, you know, young, even though they didn't get along at all, right? She never hindered me having a relationship with him. And that was so huge to me to be able to have a father presence. I think a lot of times as women, we internalize how we feel in our issues with the man. If he's not providing money, so that means you have to work harder. That means you're more tired. That means that your child doesn't have as much as they deserve. And so when that man does show up to the plate, you can feel like that's not enough, right? And you don't want them to be a fair weather father, you know, just popping in, popping out, inconsistent. But every child deserves their father. And I feel as women, we have to learn to separate sometimes rightful anger at or frustration with the man that you created a child with from the fact that that man deserves unfettered access to his son or daughter. And I think this is hugely important and it causes a lot of damage. So I want you to talk about that a little bit, babe. And then I want to go into another conversation regarding how the male temperament complements the female temperament and why that's needed when you're raising a child. Because I think that will bleed into some other aspects that we see with our little ones in the Black community that can really be solved by just the presence of a father. But what are your thoughts on that, babe? Like the actual deadbeat dad and whether or not that man deserves access to his child whenever he decides to pop up, whenever he decides he wants to be a part. Or do you think like limiting that based on his behavior? And now, mind you, barring, you know, he's whacked down on drugs or just a dangerous person, but barring those sorts of issues, do you think there's ever merit to not letting somebody see their child?
You know, that's tough as a father. Obviously, I'll advocate for the fathers. Neglect is tough, you know, and, you know, if somebody has this, you know, benign neglect, um, or what we call them to be really flighty and inconsistent, and these type of things are doing, you know, harm to the child and our children, then, you know, in that case, you know, maybe, and there's a big maybe, you know, because again, we as parents need to do what's in the best interest of the child. And so if that child is constantly looking forward to seeing and spending time with this parent, you know, this father, and again, the chronic, you know, flakiness or the chronic, you know, absenteeism, the chronic neglect, again, I could see where that could become an issue where the mother may say, hey, again, I think you're valuable. You should be able to see your child and or children. However, you know, you're just not being accountable, right? And so in that case, I could see, you know, there being some type of limitation or, keeping the baby safe, right? Emotionally, the neglectful scars that they may attain um, for the actions of the father. Um, I want to push a little bit on, I think the word you said was rightful anger or something like that. And I think I understood what you were coming from, but sometimes, as you alluded to, some of these things have nothing to do with the child, like the example that I just gave. A lot of these are situations where the mother is just vindictive. She just wants to get back at the father, you know, because in a lot of cases, the father may have, you know, chose not to, or chose to end the relationship, but still wanted to be, participatory in the child's life or children's life, right? So, and a lot of times, women take the opportunity to, you know, take these brothers through the ringer, whether it's financially, like you alluded to earlier, whether it's just not allowing them to, um, see their children, or even if it's just the bashing of, you know, the father in front of them, just, you know, hearing this constantly, over and over again that your dad is not anything and he says that and everything, and that's has, you know, a particular effect, especially on males, because again, that oftentimes that male wants to emulate his father, you know, or the males that he, sees most often, or he's more familiar with. And so if you're saying these, what types of heinous and egregious things about his father, then essentially you're saying that about him. So I don't really see, outside of that first example that I gave, you know, if we're looking at what's the best interest of the child, shouldn't be, they shouldn't be cut off from, their father. And again, less like, you allude to it, just drugs or substance or abuse or, things like that. And of course, we're not putting in the child in the safest place.
Yeah,
But
I even with like what you were saying about like um with regard to consistency and protecting the child for consistency, I hear a lot of women say that like if you're not going to be consistent, it's really hard emotionally when you pop in and then pop out. And so they would rather the father just stay out if they cannot maintain consistency. I just don't think that, me personally, that's something the place for a parent to tell another parent. Like, you don't get to be the guard dog for access to your child with another person. Now, I can understand being protective, like if somebody disappears and pops up after a year and wants to just pick up the child and take them. I guess it would just depend on how well you know that person, right? And how transparent they're willing to be, because obviously we're all going to feel protective over our children. But I think it's important to recognize that that's a child that you share with that person, and we can't determine what will be more traumatic to a child, right? We can't determine if never seeing their father is going to be less traumatic than, being able to see their father occasionally. Like, nobody knows for certain with that. And also, a lot of men give up, right? A lot of men give up when, and people can say, well, if it was my child, I would never give up and da da da. But, nobody knows how you're going to feel till it happens. And you
yeah,
don't want to push people away. You don't want
no,
to push your child's father away. And then that respite the mother needs as well. When
no,
we're talking about broken, fractured homes, right now. So,
yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. What I would add on to that, or what I was saying is that it's just the accountability piece. And here's what I mean by that. Things happen, right? Where you may have some schedule, and we know about that, right? Well, that's our secret. But things happen where, you know, the best laid plans, right, don't always come to fruition. Um, But to me, if they become chronic in the sense that the child is not being viewed as a priority and you're just flaking on the child and you're just doing other things. I mean, it's not like you're working or anything. You're like hanging out with your boys or going to the game or whatever the situation may be. And then I think in that case, even though I agree with what you're saying slightly, but again, this person is not prioritizing the child. And again, I think that has some damning effects, because neglect is a real issue. It's a real issue, in particular when we're talking about black males, because as an educator, sometimes trying to reach these young brothers is very difficult because of the experience that they've had, due to neglect. And so I have to often get through, you know, that neglectful experience that they had to go through, um, because now they're looking at me in that same lens, right? And that's unfortunate for black male educators, because we only 2%. We have enough crap to contend with, but the ones that we're there allegedly are supposedly there to save or to be surrogate fathers too and role models too, they often look at us with disdain because of what they've experienced. So I guess for me, that's why I'm so kind of like, yeah, no. I get what you're saying, and no one should be kind of like the oracle voice over, disallowing one parent to see, one's parents, visitation rights or so on and so forth. But I think once we have to protect our babies from that type of, you know, neglectful experience that's going to become traumatic. And I just feel like, again, it sounds kind of like contradictory, but if, eliminating those opportunities for that child of getting hurt, then I think that may be best. I don't like it, but again, I'm looking at, what I feel is going to be in the best interest of the child. And again, I hear your point. Who's to say, when they do, the 5% that they do show up is better than the 5% that they don't, right?
And you know
And
what
so,
those times normally look like, right? They normally look like a party, right? So dad pops up, and mind you, just where the conversation's going to move on, but we're just specifically talking about fathers that are just absent and not present on a regular basis. But, when they do show up, it's normally like a party, right? The kid normally has a blast, and then the father disappears again. And I think a lot of times the women can have animosity because the child sees the other parent as the party parent, right? And also the difficulty of having to make excuses. So I sympathize with that. I sympathize with being the person, in a position where the child is asking, like, can I talk to dad? Can I see dad? And then you can't facilitate that for them because dad is on hiatus, from parenting.
well,
But
well, and,
again, we don't know that
but
it's better to remove dad altogether. Do you know what
yeah,
I mean?
yeah, but taking on what you just said, so um, for whoever it may be, but we're talking about dads, so for that, custodial parent, right? Now, again, we're talking about what's in the best interest of the child, but that custodial parent is now viewed as the heavy, right? Because that dad, could come in, you know, every blue moon, and he's the party person, right? So it's just all fun. So, it's all shits and giggles, and everything is like, yeah, when dad comes, it's the escapism, you know, which is necessary and needed, right? But again, there's no consideration really when those type of things happen to the paternal parent. You know what I mean? To the custodial parent, excuse me, that's going to be there, that's carrying the load, and you just come and just get to go take them to McDonald's, for a couple hours. and everything is fine, and then we don't see you again for another 5 or 6 months. And I just think inevitably it's just going to cause a problem. And again, it sounds contradictory and everything, but it seems as if, you know, something is better than nothing in most cases. But I just feel like, golly, that really sucks, because I mean, everything is in balance as it is because they're out of the home. But this is not even a co-parenting situation. This is just like, yeah, whatever, you know, come over and, you know, we have pizza and we go to the zoo, and then I'll see you again next year. I mean, that is
Yeah, but
really difficult.
but my thing is that you know, I think sometimes we have to dispense with. Now, I don't think it's the healthiest. I think obviously the healthiest thing would be for a child to have access to both of their parents with regularity. But with that said, I think a lot of times we think of things in the framework of as if life has to look one certain way. And my thing is, you have to approach everything with like a healthy attitude that this can be our reality, right? And that's really what you have to do when you create a life with another human being. So, for example, there are parents that do, you know, let's say fathers, because we're talking about fathers specifically, that do like long distance truck driving. Maybe they get deployed, right? Because they're in the military and they literally may not see their children for a year. And when they come back, they're still given that right to, you know, nobody's going to say, oh, you've been,
Yeah, yeah.
but
I mean,
so, but what I'm saying is that, so it's all in how we frame it, right? Because the behavior itself is not what we have a problem with. What we have a problem with is the reasoning behind the behavior. So I don't think it's ideal, but I definitely think that now, mind you, when the child gets older, the child can make a decision, right? A 10-year-old can tell you how they feel. They can also tell the other parent how they feel. So I would say leave the door open, because there's no one set way to do this thing. There's the way that many of us would prefer, and maybe even the way that I personally think is better. But I would say leave the door open, right? And then your child will reach an age where they can speak with their own voice if you teach them to have a voice and let them have a voice. And they can take it from there, right? But all you can ever do is be loving and be open and give the other person a chance, because we have to recognize people are traveling like a path of life, and it's not going to look like ours, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. I
some
mean,
people
I
are
get
in the
that.
know.
Yeah, I get that. And I'm not trying to equate it to people who are being deployed and are working and having, you know, things legitimate to do. I'm talking about people who are just choosing to be unaccountable, just flaking. And I think that's a huge distinction between somebody who's working or deployed or has some
Right, but
legitimate.
the child doesn't see the distinction. Only the adult sees the distinction. So it really only changes the way the adult sees the absence and the way the adult reacts to the absence. The child doesn't know the difference. The child only knows the information you give them. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that, so even with the adult knowing the situation, that's still going to impact the child. I mean, so we're going back to the same thing because that's the common denominator. You know what I mean? Because again, I mean, you could be Mother Teresa, you could be, you know, Gandhi or whomever, even though he was a racist, but you could be that person, right? And at some point, you're gonna be like, listen, this Joker is just tricking off and everything. I'm trying to leave the door open and everything. You know, you're seeing this person on social media, going to trips and everything, and just standing up your child over and over again. Again, I just think that in those particular situations, it's going to be hard to keep that door open.
It
I
will.
think you shouldn't, but I
It
think
will be hard, but the thing is, it can't be about you, right? The thing is, if your child doesn't know this, and this would now, this is where he and I we're gonna probably just have to agree to disagree. I would say if you're in that situation, your child doesn't know anything more than you tell them and expose them to, right? You can choose, like my mother did, to allow me to have a great love for my father and put my father on a pedestal. And she never said a bad word about him. She just nodded her head and, yep, that's your dad. I'm so glad you had fun with your dad. And I got to know my father as a person on my own. And as long as he was willing to have me come out there twice a year, I got to go see him.
Okay,
And
but let's keep it a buck. Let's keep it a buck.
right.
We're talking about now, and that was, and there are some women, there's some black women that very much have that same type of positionality. They have that same approach. But again, we're talking about some, and I may even, even verge to say a lot of black women who have animosity, who are vindictive, and they speak ill about the father, even oftentimes when he doesn't deserve it, right? But when the fact that he does, I don't know if they're going to be willing to bite their tongue and not to besmirch the father in front of the child. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but
Right.
I'm saying if we're being, completely honest with ourselves, I'm not disagreeing with the approach you're saying, but I'm just thinking that the reality of that occurring more than not is probably not.
Well, and that's what I think that's where maturity, I think, comes in, right? Because when you bring another human being into the world and you've chosen, and that's why I feel like sex is such an important thing, right? When you've chosen to have a child with a man, then you have to become a grown up at that point. And it stops being about your feelings and what you think and, and your emotions like that. That's real and it's tangible, but it has to take a back seat because I find that something that women have a tendency to do is have animosity at the love that a child has for a father that is not doing their job.
Yes.
Right. And
Yes.
and you as women, right? We as women can become frustrated because you're struggling to make ends meet. You're struggling to keep clothes on that kid's back. You're, struggling to make sure transportation's happening. You're doing all that struggle. And the kid doesn't realize that, right? But they might even favor the father, right? That is not as participatory over you, or you may feel that. But see, it's not about you, and it can only benefit your child to have to believe the best of their own parent, and anything they find out other than that, that is their path to travel and find out on their own. It's not our place as parents to burden our children with our baggage and our emotions toward their father. And I think
agree. I agree. I just think that.
you just don't think it's realistic that women will do that.
Well, again, I'm not saying all women, but I just think there's a huge bias. Again, there's a lot of these identity politics, and a lot of women, unfortunately, get swooped up in that. Yeah, he ain't nothing. He just this and everything. And there's a lot of good fathers out there. You know what I mean? Again, regardless of the situation that may have occurred between those two, again, doesn't take away from the fact that these are good brothers, and they're getting drugged through, the meat grinder. And again, I just think that's unfortunate. So we hear that, and the other, if we pivot a little bit, of course, we know that there's some, women who are, getting a lot of, financial support, whether it's alimony, whatever the case may be, right? At huge sums, especially when we're talking about.
Yeah, but not really in the Black community. Most of our people don't.
No, I'm saying we're talking about athletes, right?
Yeah.
And again, I know the argument that has been made, so they're used to a certain lifestyle, so they should be getting that. And I'm like, okay, so I get that argument to one extent, but then where it balloons up to like, an exponential amount, I'm kind of like thinking like, is this for the child or is it for the mother? And some of these situations, mothers have gone on and, getting these exorbitant child support checks, to help, support their new man. And I'm just like, oh, hell no. So,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
I
so we
don't think that what goes on with like athletes and entertainers matters. Like, not to me. Do you know what I mean? Because that's not the life of the average Black person. And I don't know how much investment or how much judging of each other we can do because of the lens of what multimillionaires and billionaires are.
no, I'm not basing it as them being the majority, but I mean, if we look at the common denominator, they still have kids, right? And so I think some of us do unfortunately look at them, you know, as the leader within our society or within our community, the Black community, right? And say, oh, well, I want to try to mimic that. And I think that's silly, like you just alluded to. But again, I mean, we have that phenomenon too. But there was something else you suggested that we were rambling on about.
Yeah. So I wanted to also talk about, and I think this is something that is ignored a lot, but um, men really balance women out. So I think that when we talk about raising a child and the importance of fathers, it cannot be ignored that a woman left to her own devices with a child, women are more emotional creatures, right? And a lot of times men, and he's actually done this to me too, right? I will get emotional and he will tell me like, don't do this, or don't say that to him. Like I tell the baby, he doesn't like me to call him a baby. um he'll correct like the language that I'm using, especially toward the baby boy. Sorry, babe. Especially toward my youngest. And he'll correct like the language that I use, or let's say if my temperament is off, like having a man present like that can be corrected. I think when women are left to their own devices, especially a woman, and again we're talking about um, homes that are not intact, but in an intact home, the father is the balance there, right? So he's able to step in and often be a more sedate voice and a more reasonable voice that complements the mother. The mother is very nourishing. She is more empathetic, but that also means that she's more emotional and things like that. And so, what we find in households that are woman led a lot of the time is we see things like yelling, right? Men normally don't tolerate that when they're present. They normally help to taper a woman down so she's not screaming at the children. We see a balance there. And so I think when we think of fathers being important to children, it's also important because they balance out the energy of the mother and also provide the mother enough respite and direction so that she can be the most effective mother she can be to the child. What are your thoughts on that, babe?
Well, I think you're going to piss off a lot of feminists, um, but I agree. I think it should be a very complementary role that the man and a woman play, and it's a very symbiotic role, right? And so it's not a situation where we're in competition with each other. And again, that's to me a lot of toxic femininity, where it's competition and it's feministic ideologies where, well, the women can do this and do this, and she doesn't need to be subservient to the man. No one's saying that. No one's saying that at all. But what we are saying is like you alluded to, is that we're complementary, that we know we have roles. And again, sometimes these roles kind of, they're switched on their head sometimes. Again, sometimes these roles are fluent, you know. Sometimes, again, you know, the mother is the heavy and the father is the more calming and rational, like, okay, I think we should do that. And sometimes it's the other way, right? Where the dad, it's a different way that he
Where
goes.
the dad is emotional.
Well,
Oh, heck no.
not emotional, but I'm saying it's like, just a little bit more stern and vociferous and everything like that. Just so it's done in their own organic ways, right? But again, sometimes those things have some kind of fluidity to them. And again, they all end up balancing themselves out. They all end up being complementary. complementary to each other. And again, this is the yin and yang that our babies need to see. They definitely need to see that. You know, you're right. Women, for the most part, are way more emotional. That doesn't mean that men don't emote, right? We emote in our own ways. But again, when we emote the ways in which, the woman kind of help and soothe us, we need that too. And the babies need to see that. They need to see, you know, especially a black man and a woman getting along harmoniously. And again, that's not, a monolithic way that's going to be viewed all the time. But again, they should see that. They should be able to emulate that. So they shouldn't be too, hyper anything, So if they do get emotional, they know this parent over here could, talk to me rationally or whatever. There's a calming sense. And I think that's what you're talking about as far as the male being present, right? And that's important. Again, so when we say this to those of you who may be feminists, that doesn't mean that the woman is less important. It doesn't mean that at all. But it means that, we have complementary roles and we need each other. And our babies need to see that. And so I really think that's important. One of the things that I used to be guilty of, and I find it appalling now, is that, on Father's Day now they have, cards for mothers too, right? In particular, Black mothers. And kind of know where that kind of stems from, right? We talked about the data and the narrative and everything that father's not being there and the absenteeism.
Nah, that's just white society being shady as hell. That's really what that is.
But no, well, I concur with that. But again, there's a lot of people that agree with that foolishness. They really are. And it's just, to me, like I said, we had another conversation. It's a backhanded compliment. It's not really a compliment, in my opinion. You're not a father. You know what I mean? You're not. You may be an outstanding mother, but that doesn't make you a father. You know what I mean? Just think about it. Just think about this juxtaposition, right? There's no way in hell that the opposite could happen, right? So on Mother's Day, feminists and people will have a fit. Oh, you know what, Father, you're also a great mother. They'll look at you like, Negro, please, really?
I mean, a man would just be insulted by being called a great any type of woman. Like,
absolutely, right?
Because that's like a demotion. Like, not to say mothers are less than fathers, just to say that you have to admit the positionality is different. Like women, it's one, like, when you're told it's like being told you throw like a girl. It's not a compliment. Do you know what I mean? It's like a demotion. So I think that's why it probably wouldn't go the adverse, because most men would be like, that's not a flipping compliment to me. Like, what are you saying right now?
But if we think about it, I mean, if we really deconstruct it and think about it, again, I posted something on Facebook today talking about how Father's Day is barely even a blip, right? There's Christmas and there's Mother's Day, and then there's, the rest of these, Columbus Day and all these other things that precede Father's Day, right? But I'm just thinking, so mothers are viewed in high regard, and which they should. No one's discounting that. I'm not, that's not an argument. But what I am saying is, so if you're utilizing that as a compliment, and if you're saying, hey, Father, is, you're a mother too, in that complimentary role, although I hear what you're saying, more practical and pragmatic speaking, no one wants to say, have that association with, the female gender, right? That just, in our patriarchal society, that's not good. But again, if we're looking at mothers, within this apex as being so complimentary that they are great, which they are, but at the same time, you could say during Father's Day that you're the mother and the father. Really? So it just chaps my hide because it doesn't, it's not the reality. And I wish, especially we in the Black community would really say, no, you're an outstanding mom, but you're not an outstanding mom and an outstanding dad. You're not taking the place of two. I mean, that's just not occurring. You may be busting your butt and everything and doing the best you can, doing your due diligence to raise your child and our children and everything, but you're not a father. And I could never be a mother. And so that's one of the things on Father's Day that really, really bothers me. And again, I used to be under that, identity politics, or like, oh, these women, they're holding it down because the men aren't there. And I'm like, yeah, they're holding it down. Yeah, the man's not there, but they're not fathers.
Yeah, I totally get that. But I definitely think that that aside, women have to be more open to having that male presence because I think it's healthier for the child. You need a check and a balance. Do you know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
yes, yes, I do. I do. And again, I think it goes back to what we're talking about, the vindictive nature of some women, um, where they may, obstruct or limit or prevent, co-parenting, that's going to benefit the child just because they're in their feelings like Drake. That just can't continue to happen. That just can't continue to happen, but it does. And again, a lot of the laws, a lot of the feminist rhetoric, really backs this. It's based on, really nothing more than emotionality, and that's unfair to the brothers who are trying um, to really be participatory in their children's life.
I agree. I agree. Do you, I think, um, just to speak about like families that are intact, and I think it's important to say, like, the idea of having this discussion is really to just be encouraging to look at situations like a little bit differently than you would normally look at them. In the Black community, it's going to be heavily focused, directed at the women, right? Because the most of our households are woman led. So then we have to, when we talk about fathers, we have to talk about that in the guise of the positionality of the mother, right? Because often the child is in the home with the mother and with the mother most of the time. Um, what do you think, babe, is a good blueprint for men who aren't sharing a home with their child as far as interaction goes?
Um, it's going to vary. I would dare to say that there should be, you know, one holistic blueprint, right? Because in situations may be, they may vary. They may be very nuanced. Um, However, with that being said, one thing I would suggest is to try, if when possible, to try to really, be amicable with the mom. And sometimes that may be difficult because, again, she may have, she may harbor some ill will towards the brother based upon, you know, the, based upon the breakup, you know. So again, that emotionality is a very real concern. But if that could be withstood, and if you could center the child, um, and both see it as a rational thing, to be amicable and to co-parent, I would really start there. For me, I would try to leave the court system out of it as much as possible. If you had a person that could mediate, whether it's a mutual person that you both trust, whether it's a pastor or somebody in your community or a good friend or an elder, um, that, could actually mediate it, and of course the mediator should be, fair and impartial, right? I think that would be a good thing to do. And then based upon that mediation, you two, really draft up a proposal and a plan that could be, really acted upon consistently, right? And that also includes, the financial component of it. So again, having these types of conversations, if possible, you know, trying to come to some type of amicable conclusion, resolution, you know, again, figuring out what the brother can do financially, and being honest, he has to be honest with her as far as what he can and can't do. And with that being said, doing those things that you can't do on a consistent basis. And like I said earlier, all of this has to, predicate on what's best for the child and or children. And so again, that's one of the things I would suggest, because oftentimes getting the courts involved in it, getting lawyers involved in it, it's a lot of money that's often wasted.
I so agree. I could have gone to the child.
That could be utilized specifically for the child.
Mm-hmm.
So it's unfortunate that sometimes, going through the legal system is a necessary evil. But again, those monies could have been used towards the child and or that's a spouse or their partner. You know what I mean? So if you're talking about alimony, if you're talking about child support, you spend, several $100,000, drawing out a long, you know, legal battle over custody. Again,
I feel like most of our people self-represent though, babe, because not everybody has, like, we have to think about like the greater Black community that can't afford to pay $300 an hour.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I can only speak for myself. I had to lawyer up. I wasn't.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But we can't. That's what I'm saying. Like, but we can't say that because most of our people cannot afford to pay $300 an hour to be in like a lengthy legal battle.
Yeah.
And aren't in a position even to pay alimony. They're not at that income bracket. Well, you have to make a lot of money to have to pay alimony.
Yeah, but the other end of that argument is that, sometimes if you can afford an attorney for a short time, maybe that may, reduce the time. You know what I mean? Because when it's you two and you're going in there, because the system is not for the child, and the damn sure it's not for any parent. So they're going to try to put you both as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So even in some cases when there's one, like in my situation, where I did, hire an attorney, and like you alluded to, she represented herself, with some legal help from somebody, whether it was an aunt or somebody, but it was kind of short and sweet because I think there was that representation. But again, that's not to say that just because you have representation that it's going to go as short and sweet as our experience did. I know, there have been people that have been lawyered up, and this has gone just, extensively long. Just like, really? And again, I go back to what I said initially. The court systems, they don't give two rat poops about the children in most cases, not about you.
Sure.
So they're all about, monetizing the situation and dragging it out as long as possible. And again, if we're going to keep it a buck, if we're going to be honest, most of the attorneys go the same way because guess what? They're getting paid as well. So, that's kind of how that game is played.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think too that, and this comes back to just like authoring your emotions, right? And not, because those battles aren't really for the child. Those battles are for the parents. But I want to talk about a dad's money as well. So we've talked a lot about like just the presence of a father. And I think we both feel equally strongly. Maybe I feel a little more stronger, more strongly than you actually, about how necessary the presence of a father is.
No, I feel very strongly that father, the present father, is very necessary. I just, I do feel there's a little ambivalence about that neglect because of, or maybe guess just based on my experience, in particular around black males and how that neglect slash absenteeism is really, really harmful and heinous to the psyche of these young brothers. But again, it's hard for me to say that because I do advocate for fathers, but again, I can't advocate for foolishness and not being accountable.
Yeah, that I totally understand. I think also like something that I think about is essentially the money of fathers, right? So, like I said, we've talked a lot about like the presence of fathers, but I think the money of fathers is important too. And I bring this up because you were bringing up child support and things like that. And um, I just think that, and this is like as a woman talking, but I think, and I'm speaking from this perspective, not just because it's Father's Day, but also because, at least in our community, it's the women who are often the single parent, right? So that's more the norm in our community. So I'm just speaking to what the norm is, not to say there aren't exceptions to this. But, when you share a home with a child, if that child, if you eat, that child eats, right? You don't have the luxury of not feeding the child for the day, but feeding yourself for the day. And so I think the fathers that are not in the home have to think about their role in their child's life financially in that same way. Like if you had a meal today, then you want to do some provision for your child to have a meal that day, the same way the present parent does have to do that every day. If you are able to go out and do something recreational, then your child deserves to do something recreational. If you can buy yourself a new shirt, then your child deserves a new shirt too, right? And that's just, I think, good parenting, whether you're the custodial parent or the non-custodial parent. Um, you should not do for yourself and then do nothing for your child. So I think if your life is affordable, like if you're surviving, then you have the means to make your child survive. Normally, when a child is in your home, if the child is going hungry, unless you're a horrible parent, if that child is going hungry, that means that you're also not eating. If you're eating, then that child is eating. So I think when parents aren't in the home, they need to have that same view, because it's not just your time that matters, but it is the money that matters. And I think maybe thinking of it from that perspective will make it feel less. And maybe you can speak to this more than I can. I find a lot of men feel like um, that they don't like to financially contribute because they feel like they're contributing to the woman. I think both the men and the women in these situations fixate a lot on the other parent, a lot less than they do the child. And a lot of their motivations and emotions and thought process surrounding raising their child or being a father or mother includes a lot of thought process about the other adults. And
Yeah, yeah,
mhm.
I concur. I think a lot of the thoughts are around I'm not supporting you, I'm supporting the child. And so I think sometimes it's a limited framework that we often apply. And here's what I mean by that. So when we just think of it as money, which is important, right? But I tend to utilize the word resources because you may have, access or resources to getting food, right? And I'm not talking about EBT cards or anything like that, but you may, right? I mean, you can sell EBT cards to come up, but I'm just saying,
People have those everywhere. People may not know what those are.
food stamp cards, they know what that is.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, um, so the father may have access to, some food, right? Or however means he comes about that legally, right? We're not, advocating or condoning illegal things. No, I just need to be clear. But again, so there may be things that, the father may be resourceful, but may not have just a lot of money. And so to me, if that father is able to attain, food or, some clothing, or if that father is able to have the child covered on their insurance, you know what I mean? So there's things, like I said, there's nuance. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a financial component to it, but I'm saying I think we should be creative and look at the resources that are being provided to that child as well. And sometimes that's not even an option, right? It's just like, I want, I think you call it a decimeter or whatever, based upon this amount, we want this. And sometimes, that's not a reality for that person. Again, it doesn't mean that they're not contributing. And sometimes they may be contributing even well, but it's just they can't contribute at that rate. And again, I agree with you that, yeah, if you're eating, your child should eat. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And again, I think that is the case for the most part. But I think sometimes we just get fixated and caught up in this particular number and not seeing, okay, how can this same thing still be accomplished? You know what I mean? What resources, can we, that you may have that may mitigate this and bring it down to this?
Yeah, like if you bring a bag of groceries, that's the same
Absolutely.
as money. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I think that's something
Yeah,
that
or if
should,
you pay the daycare bill, or if you, I think like, and I think they, that is a way to be creative. I think women do have to be less firm. Like, I just want the cash. If the father is covering an expense, right? So saying, I'll pay for ballet, or I don't know why I'm picking out my kids' activities, but I'll pay for ballet, or I'll pay for, daycare, or I will, have, food delivered to the house every 2 weeks or something like that. I think, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about like, you can author how this dynamic looks like
absolutely.
any way that you like. Like, you don't have to do it the way that everybody else does it. It's okay to do it differently in a way that works for you and your family. There's no cookie cutter approach. And so if he's not comfortable with giving cash, instead of, getting your panties in a bunch, literally, ladies, what we can do is go, okay, like if he's like, well, I don't know what you're going to spend it on, da da da. Even if he's being nasty, like it's not about that, right? It's about your child having access to what they need. So
Yeah,
what,
because if I'm going to get my son's haircut every week, and it's like, 25 or $20 a pop, right? Or every other week, and like I said, if he's on my insurance, and if I'm, bringing food, or if I am, like paying for his football equipment.
oh my gosh, I love you. We're so in sync. I was thinking that too. Like, 'cause sports are like a job, y'all.
Yeah, and if I'm paying, his rent, or helping him with books and stuff like that when he's in college, there's just certain things, like you said, we could be creative
Right.
with. And, again, the child still's not going without. If I am, purchasing all of his school clothes and things like that,
Right.
those things go a long way. So again, it, you know, and there's even this, I don't know if it fits for this, conversation necessarily, but there's even things where, claiming of the child, right? Because if, some situations where there's, so like my son was staying with me, especially when he's younger, it was like 50-50. So it was like,
What do you mean on taxes?
excuse me?
You mean like on taxes?
Yeah. And
Okay.
so there's things you could say, hey, you could claim, you know what I mean? You could do that. And when they're supposed to go like, every other, you know what I mean? There's
Yeah,
all
like rotate years. Like you claim it
absolutely.
on
You
taxes
could just
this year, I'll claim next year.
yeah, and
Yeah,
you could do that, or you could say, listen, you could just, even though we're splitting this, you could keep you know what I mean? There's so many different, ideas, resolutions that, if we're creative and amicable enough, we could come to that. And again, it still has the same financial implications, as far, I mean, the financial outcomes, not implications, right? But same financial outcomes. The baby's still getting the resources that he needs, right? And so I think that's what we should look at. But again, oftentimes there's a hard line like, no, I want this amount. And if I don't get this amount, you're not going to see your child, you're a deadbeat, and all this other stuff. I'm like,
right.
yeah, it's just,
But that's why it's important, like we were saying earlier, to know that you can do this any sort of way. And the thing is, the ultimate goal is just that the child has what they need. So like I said earlier, we did a lot of talking about like how important the time was, but when it comes to the finances, because this is where a lot of women get real tight about things, know that it doesn't have to be cash in hand. Like, come to, if he's uncomfortable with it, and a lot of men look at the celebrity situations, or feel so, like, men get into their feelings too, feel some kind of way about just handing over cash and things like that, instead of taking it personally, right? Because it's not about us, right? Then, like he was saying, then you can start to be creative. Okay, well, you carry the insurance, can you cover the copays? Can you do the haircuts? If do you mind sending, a, a bag of groceries or whatever, like, because this is the modern age, having that delivered to the house, every week. Or like if you do a farm co-op thing where they send fresh fruits and vegetables, will you cover 2 of those deliveries a month? Or, can you cover the daycare expense? Or like he said, the football expense or whatever it is. Whatever you have to do so that the child gets what they need. And also it builds trust, right? Because a lot of these conversations are about, I don't really trust you, right?
absolutely.
Likely for women, it's because they hurt you or they violated you in some way. So you don't trust this man. So, and he doesn't trust you for whatever the reasons are. So that is actually builds trust. Then that man is like, okay, so she's really not after the money. It's kind of like the homeless person on the street. I'm not comparing like, the mothers of men's children to homeless people, but I'm just saying it's kind of like the homeless person on the street who tells you they want a sandwich. But then when you're like, I'll take you right up to the diner and buy you a sandwich, they get mad, they want money instead. And then you feel like maybe they didn't want that sandwich. You know what I mean? So as women, we can build trust, because that should be the goal, is to build trust in a relationship with the father of your child by saying, okay, look, I'm not trying to reach for your bag. Okay, this is not to fund my new car. So can you just cover these expenses directly? Can you just do these things directly? Because it's the same as money in your pocket if you're not paying for it. And then you can allocate those funds to other things to run the household. And the man knows where his money is going, and he trusts you more because that it's clear that you're legit. And I think we have to start looking at things that, what'd you say, baby?
A battery running low.
Okay. I think we have to look at things that way. But anyway, y'all, we're not on the same computer. So we are going to go because his battery is going to die out. But I just wanted to have this conversation with you guys for Father's Day, because fathers are so important. So just give some thought to what we talked about with regard to giving fathers time with their children, trying to put aside personal feelings, um, having a father there and allowing him to balance out your feminine energy, and be a buffer, and kind of complement each other, and also being creative with how you author like monetary things and child support and things like that. Just knowing that you have the ability to make this thing look any way you want. And if you set yourself aside, and you put the child first, like that's what matters. And I guess that's what I would have to say in closing. What about you, baby? Oh, baby? Oh, crap. Okay. Is your computer dead? Okay. Okay, so his computer's dead. So, yeah, we're just going to wrap it up because we were only supposed to be on here an hour. But I hope you guys took something from that. And he and I will come and we'll talk to you guys again a little bit later. So let me see what's up with him. And with that said, peace to the chat, y'all.